in committee, meeting in public, which is being recorded. Have no actions to report on. Apologies for absence. We've received several apologies. Stephen Course, but we have Sarah Elliott with us, who is deputizing, so will be voting member. Welcome, Sarah. Ian Wakes sent apologies. Tricia Dorsey, we have Karen Watts as deputy, as voting member. Mark Burgess, James Granger, Jason Stokes, Peter Taylor, Sally Watson, Deborah Deplin, and we'll check at the end whether there's anyone missing from that list, but those are the ones we've been informed about. Declarations of interest. The register is included in the meeting pack, but does anyone need to highlight a specific interest for the part 1 agenda? No. Good. The minutes of the meeting, as per usual, I'll take them in their entirety. So does anyone have a comment as to accuracy of those minutes, please? No, many thanks, Sarah. That takes me to the action log. There's 3 items on there. 197 is proposed to be closed, but I suggest that Sadie talks to this point when we go through the risk register on the agenda shortly. And item 198, report on LCS activities. So the proposal is to change the due date to July. And I'm also conscious we received a question from a member of public around LCS activity trackers, so maybe that will give some inspiration for that point. But we'll change the due date to July. And similarly for action 199, the proposal is to change the due date to July. So I suggest we do that. Does anyone have any other comments as to the action log? Good. Then we move swiftly on to the forward planner. So Sadie, can I hand over to you for that?
Yes, thank you, Hein. This is our new forward planner. As is normal, it's likely to adapt throughout the year. I would just like to apologise for the dates. Somehow they've gone to a different language in some of the columns, so we'll sort that for next time. As you can see, Sarah's now structured it in terms of how the agenda is structured, so it makes it a bit clearer for us to see what's coming and when. And obviously it now reflects that we will be meeting every other month following the agreed changes at the last meeting. So unless there are any questions or queries, I don't propose to say anything more on the forward plan.
Thanks, Sadie. Any comments from anyone? As she said, Sadie, it's a live document, so we can update it as we go through the year. But many thanks for including that. We stay with you for item 6, the risk summary report.
Thank you, Hein. So as you can see, we're still grappling with InPhase, the new system that we're using. So it doesn't necessarily print off brilliantly when we're pulling the pack together. So apologies for people having to get out their magnifying glasses when they're reading some of this. But in terms of the overall summary, we haven't had any new risks highlighted this month. We haven't had any changes in scoring. And we haven't de-escalated any risks this month. What we have had since the last meeting is a really helpful deep dive meeting with our corporate affairs colleagues, and we focused on the dental risks in the main, but a lot of the discussion was applicable to the other risks as well, and were really helpful to those that attended. And we do, I think Sarah has actually arranged the meetings already so that we can go through all of the other risks one by one and spend some really focused time on them. And that will be reflected in future reports. So the national insurance issue, that's obviously not unique to general practice. It does affect all of our primary care contractors, and we do continue to review. I mean, we have noted the LMC's concerns in previous meetings, and I think with the uplift of 7.2% to general practice, specifically if we're thinking about the action point highlighted in the previous item, I think we're still watching this one and listening to the feedback that we're getting. So we haven't changed any of the scores at the moment. I think some of the feedback that I've had specific to general practice is that this is going to be more of a risk for practices with higher numbers of salaried doctors than those with higher numbers of partners. But how that actually plays out, I think we're yet to see. So I don't really have anything further to add as a general overview, but we've got lots of subject matter experts on the call today for any specific comments or queries.
Thank you, Sadie. So yeah, in phase indeed is. I didn't bother getting my magnifying glass out, but I went by the summary reports. But yeah, pleased to see there has been a deep dive and it's worth everyone's while. So I hope that will be continued. But opening up for comments, Lisa.
Hello there. Thank you, Sadie. Hi. We are still getting feedback that the pressures and resilience are not improving, that practices are still under continued stress, and staff are reporting burnout that is a concern. We are meeting with the LMC, the wellbeing, ICB wellbeing fellow, and we've just instigated a wellbeing meeting to be able to support that too. We are getting feedback from GPs. Their GPs are available in the Norfolk and Waveney area. However, practices that are rural are still struggling to recruit, and there is not enough funding to recruit the experienced GPs. Because of the fund, practices haven't got enough funding for the experienced. Obviously, the newer ones are covered under the R's funding. True rate vacancy rates are not reported by practices because a lot of them are not advertising because they actually haven't got the funding to recruit. So there seems to be a gap in what is being reported by the primary care workforce team and what are actual vacancy rates. So we still are very concerned about the resilience of general practice and the health and well-being of all staff across general practice and primary care, because patients are becoming, we are getting it reported that they are becoming more and more aggressive in demand and almost entitled, and with they're just asking so much more, and demand is far exceeding capacity. Unfortunately, there just doesn't seem to have been any decrease in the pressures since really the winter, to be fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Fiona.
Thank you. I know that colleagues from the LDC are not here today, but they have asked us to highlight the risk of national insurance, which Sadie did refer to. And obviously it's early days as to whether there's going to be a significant impact on NHS dental services, but we are watching closely. They have highlighted this as a big risk, and of course with no additional monies going into dentistry, the risk remains high around their stability and resilience.
Thanks, Fiona. Any other comments? So what I would suggest, I think it's truly valuable input. It is still early days, I think, in the year, so I would support what Sadie said. We keep a watching brief, and everyone has contributed to keep us honest as we go through the year, whether indeed the risk manifests itself more strongly. But I would suggest, or I would ask voting members, that we approve the risk scoring as it is in front of you, but I will voice over to the board next week the national insurance point, which is not just for general practice, but also I think all primary care providers. Are committee members happy to support it? Good, thank you. That takes us to item 7, which is a note that is also going to ICB board next week, Primary Care Access Improvement Plan. I think, Amanda, you will introduce that.
Thank you, Hein. So yes, the paper's come to this group today for noting, having previously been considered and discussed by the delivery group in April. We took on board some of the feedback from there, which was that it would be helpful to have a short paragraph in there that talked about how the different topics that the paper covers hang together. So hopefully we've addressed that, but if there is any further feedback, that we always find that useful. PCARP, or the Primary Care Recovering Access Plan, was a national plan that was introduced in 2023. It has come to an end, so this is the final report that will need to go to our public board on this plan. My understanding is that at national level there is a draft plan that will build on this PCARP plan, but we have yet to see it, and it may be a while before we do. So unless there's any other feedback in there or questions, hopefully that can be taken as read.
Thank you, Amanda. And who will talk to this at ICB board? Do you happen to know?
Mark Burgess is the exec who's leading this. I think
Okay.
Sadie's at something else, but I think I'll be available if needed.
Good, thank you. So opening up for questions or comments, and I'm conscious, I think many on the call will have been in the delivery group discussion, but just checking if there's comments. No, that's the beauty about having a discuss it already in a delivery group. So most discussion has taken place there. The thing that I observe, and I think it's more by definition, but it's light on dentistry, and I know we're going to talk about dentistry in a moment, but I guess that's by design almost, how PCARP has been set up. Is that correct, Amanda?
Yeah, so it's mainly focused on implementing the modern general practice model and pharmacy first.
Yeah. Good. Well, if there's no further comments, many thanks, Amanda. That takes us to item 8, the long-term plan for dentistry. Fiona, I can hand over to you.
Thank you. So I'll take the paper as read, but would like to highlight a few points. So at the last committee meeting, you received a report on year 1 progress, and this paper sets out the ambition for plans to deliver a wide range of projects for year 2, linked back to the long-term dental plan. And really the primary aim of the plans, as we know, is to support local provider resilience and to improve the access for patients and to reduce health inequalities. And those primary aims remain the same this year. We do have an additional national target to meet this year. It's our contribution to the 700,000 additional unscheduled care appointments, and we have plans in place to address that and feel that we can address that without any concerns. As you can see, it is ambitious. The investment referred to comes out of the dental ring fence budget, and any recurrent investment would need to be freed up through a targeted rebasing or renegotiating contracts that are under delivering year on year, so that we can make sure that all of our contracts are really delivering activity and therefore improving access for our local population. The plan also includes a number of measurable outcomes, some of which are linked to national outcomes and others more locally. I think in terms of measuring access, it's quite I suppose a black and white, simple assessment of activity, and I think that perhaps there's a need to look at how we can measure patient experience and triangulate a number of sources to look at whether we are really making a difference. But the first start of that was looking at whether we're making an impact on areas of deprivation, and you will see the heat maps that are attached to the back, which gives you an indication of where new patient activity is currently being seen, and we will continue to monitor that, but also to do a much deeper dive into the particular areas of deprivation. And then finally to say that it's really important this year that we're monitoring the contracts and how we're delivering our pathways and new services, so that we can make sure that we're bringing benefits and value for money to the ICB. And also we can agree support plans with local providers who may be struggling. In that context, I draw your attention to the risks that are set out in the paper of actually delivering the plan this year. But ask PCC members to agree the recommendations as set out in the paper, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Opening up for questions and comments. Karen.
So much, Hein, and really just a huge thank you to Fiona. I can't express how challenging it's been, and what you've achieved in the first year has been very, very good indeed. I think I'll be really keen to focus next time on the patient experience and the evaluation of the support plans, but also I was just wondering about the staff experience. What feedback have you had, Fiona, from the dentists themselves? Thank you.
I might actually refer to one of my colleagues, Nick, to give some more perhaps independent view on that. But we have had very positive feedback from the providers about, and the LDC, about how we've proactively engaged with local providers, in supporting individual practices, talking to them, listening to them, and I think that's has been as important as providing actual tangible support in some respects.
Nick, you already had your hand up, but maybe you want to add to Fiona and then ask your question or your comment.
I did. Well, first of all, I think that Norfolk and Waveney ICB are held up as a beacon of working really well with their providers, their dental providers. There's no doubt that within the local dental committee, which is the litmus test for how good that relationship is, there has been a big change since the ICB took over the role of delegating or taking on commissioning and contracting responsibilities. So I think that's a really positive one. And in answer to your question, Karen, I think that there is this feeling locally that we are being supported. The problem we've got, of course, is that nationally it doesn't look as though that's being mimicked. And we would like to see national government sort of step up and start to make things a little bit more straightforward. And that was my point I was going to make, Hein, was that really trying to commission primary care dentistry is like trying to nail jelly to the wall. because every time you think that you're heading in the right direction, the government tend to come in with something new, like you've got to take on X number of additional urgent care cases. And that makes it extremely difficult. Now, I know Fiona probably and her team will be really struggling to manage that. And one of the risks with diverting the money from UDA delivery and routine dental care, and bear in mind that there's only a finite amount of work that can be done in Norfolk by dentists that's been commissioned. If you divert some of that, or quite a large proportion of that, to urgent care, which is what the government are encouraging, then you're actually not doing as much for your routine care cases. And so there's going to be an even greater outcry from those patients that want to get a routine examination for them and their family, but can't because there's even fewer appointments available. So that's going to be an issue. One of the questions I was going to ask of Fiona, and if Tom Norfolk, my colleague, was here, he'd probably be able to answer it, was that on page 6 of the paper, there's some talk about relaxing ring fencing, Fiona, for 25 and 26. And ring fencing has always been an issue within primary care dentistry. And I'd be interested in what that might involve going forwards, because it could make quite a difference. And the other thing we've already covered in the risk assessment, that is that expected delivery of UDAs in 25-26 is going to go up by another 3% to 76%. And I think that's very ambitious given the national insurance increases that we've just been talking about, and they may have quite an impact. But I'd be interested to know about the ring fencing, Fiona, because that could be quite an important factor in the way that we can commission primary care dentistry. I finished.
Thank you, Nick. So I can confirm that the budget is ring fenced for this year, and that has been confirmed, and that is what our plans are based on. What we can't say is what will happen in future years. So that's why it's really important that when we're looking at our investments, is that we make sure that where it's recurrent money, that money is actually ring fenced and available year on year on year. And that's why I said the investment is going to come from rebasing underperforming contracts. And then for non-recurrent monies, that's coming from the underspend. And so that is a year on year spend. And of course, the ironic factor is if we improve delivery of UDAs, and we've gone from 65% in 23-24 to forecast around 73% for 24-25, which is fantastic, and all down to the hard work of our local providers. It actually means less investment is available to support some of the pathways and workforce planning. But I think at the moment we can only plan for 25-26 and do what we can to make a difference. I don't know whether Sarah's got any comments on the finances.
Any insights, Sarah?
Not really. No, I think you sort of highlighted, and especially with the underperformance. I mean, from 23-24 to 24-25, we did see a reduction of about 3 million, I think, in terms of the underperformance. So again, that's positive because that means more UDAs. And I'm, as people have been on the DSDG meetings will know that I fully support anything to do with rebasing the contracts to get them so we can get the money to where it needs to be and not to practices who aren't delivering. So
good. I had a comment and a question. So the recommendation is that this committee will get an update in March 2026. Given the importance of delivery against this plan, I think it would be good sort of halfway the year, say October or December, Fiona, if we could bring sort of a status back to this committee. I know you'll do it more frequently in the delivery group. And another checkpoint, and I'm not sure whether it's you or say you can give me the latest. If we approve or support this recommendation, do we have all other approvals internally lined up?
So we are waiting for the funding to be finally signed off,
Okay.
which was expected to be done in the next week or so.
All right. Good. Is committee happy to support the recommendations as outlined in the note? I take that as a yes, so that is supported. Many thanks, Fiona, for that. That takes us to item 9, the integrated performance report. I saw that Diane had joined us, so can I hand over to you, Diane?
Many thanks, Chair. So for those that don't know me, I'm Diane Smith. I am the Head of Collaborative Commissioning and Performance in the ICB. So thank you for having me for this item today. Just in summary, taking the papers as read, we, as an ICB, have a duty to make sure we have assurance on performance. That is in order to ensure we are delivering value for money for our population, that we're achieving outcomes, quality of care and experience that we would expect. We've been redeveloping the Integrated Performance Report, the IPR, for about 6 months now, partly driven by an audit of the ICB on its performance management, an audit by TIA, and recommendations that came through in 2024. And it goes hand in hand also with the performance management framework, which has now been approved and ratified by the board. We've been doing this in order to refine and really to reduce the number of key performance indicators that we've been looking at, to remove some duplication and ensure that there's clear distinction between key performance indicators and other types of data that help to inform that performance position. We've also introduced statistical process control, or SPC charts, as per best practice and recommendations from NHS England. And in building the IPR, the views that will come through then to programme boards and to committee and up to the board will include the assurance narrative. And that really is the key thing when it comes to assurance, that as an organisation, as a system, we can explain the rationale, the reasoning, why our performance is where it is, and what it is that we're doing about that performance, the actions, the owners, and the timelines for those actions. Additionally, we've built the reporting kind of layering to follow the scheme of delegation. So that is really the top 3 tiers: the ICB board, the committees that have delegation from the board, and then the programme boards underneath that do much more of the operational work around that. So in the PowerPoint pack, the final slide just outlines, so we've been working with subject matter experts, so colleagues within dental, pharmacy, general practice across the ICB, as well as our BI, business intelligence colleagues, to look at which key performance indicators we include here, and they very much align with national planning guidance and PCARP. So we make sure we've covered those off, as well as any constitutional metrics throughout the reporting as well. So open to any comments or questions, but we have had fairly significant discussions about what should be reported up through the various layers of governance to provide those insights into the performance coming through to PCCC, and then a selection of those up to the board.
Many thanks, Diane, and also for your sterling work together with other colleagues of getting this really lined up for all the committees and the board. It's great to see it come together. So many thanks for that. I'll open up for questions and comments from anyone. Sadie.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank Diane and her team. I mean, they've been so great to work with on this and really sort of open to feedback, etc. So really grateful. We've been obviously trying to build a performance report for a very long time, and you've made it happen. So thank you. I think it would be really helpful for us at every layer that you've set out here. It's certainly something we've had highlighted in audit reports before and also requested by various members of the committee in the past. I think sometimes it's easy to think that this is all we do when we look at the data, and of course there's a huge amount more that happens in primary care and that is within the remit of the committee, but it's really important to be able to report against the ops planning guidance. And I just wanted to highlight that one of the things that Hein has asked for, which we will be bringing to future committees, is a sort of more of a narrative report around primary care to provide some more of the background about the other areas of work that we are focused on. My final comments, I suppose, are really in, since the time that we wrote all of this down, Diane. So I wonder whether for the board we ought to be updating around pharmacy first uptake as well under the GP and pharmacy section. And the other thing that we have noted is that the GP appointment booking within 2 weeks has actually been dropped now, I think, as one of our indicators to report on. And I guess it'd be good to hear from members whether they feel that's an important thing for us to continue to monitor or not.
I'll come to you in a moment, Diane. You can reflect on what people say. Thanks, Sadie. Nick.
One question I think that could be asked of people that are looking at this is, on the dental perspective, what are unique patients? What are unique children and what are unique adults? And I'm imagining the metric we'll use for that is the 20 and not been seen at the practice for 24 months, which is what was known as the new patient premium metric. But it would be helpful, I think, for people that are reading this to understand what a unique patient actually was, so that they're clear, because it could mean all sorts to different people.
Thanks, Nick. Lauren.
Yeah, I think this is a really fantastic piece of work, and it'll be great to have a reference point, because I spend a lot of time trying to look at data and trying to understand what's actually happening out there, particularly in a timely manner. My only thing on the points around pharmacy first, hypertension and contraception, it's great that hypertension and contraception are included, but they're not actually pharmacy first, so you might just want to jig about the reference there. The other thing is about pharmacy first minor ailments referrals from NHS 111, because that's not reflected in the report at the moment, and also urgent medicine supplies. The other thing you could put in there for context is just actually around number of prescriptions dispensed as well, so you can actually see the background of workload that's coming through alongside the services that are being delivered, just to help contextualize, because I think that's quite freely available. But I think this is a fantastic piece of work, and I really look forward to sort of seeing the finished product.
Thanks, Lauren. I'll come to you in a moment, Sarah, but maybe Sharon wants to pick up on some of the pharmacy points.
Yeah, I just wanted to give some context to Lauren in terms of the pharmacy first bit, and the reason we focused on the clinical conditions rather than the other two elements is that's kind of what NHS England is focusing on. So unfortunately, they are using the pharmacy first term for contraception and hypertension as well, which I also have an issue with because it's not part of the pharmacy first service. But in terms of their focus, it is purely on the clinical conditions. So I think in the background that we can probably monitor the minor ailments and the urgent supply, but I think from an NHS England reporting perspective, it is purely the clinical conditions that they're focused on. I'm not sure the reasoning behind that, and we've got a primary care network meeting tomorrow, so it might be something we can ask there, but that would remain our priority focus, would be the clinical conditions. But agree, referrals from NHS 111 is important because that's part of the metrics into using pharmacy first. We can probably pick that one up.
Thanks. Sarah.
Yes, it was just to pick up on the dropping of the 2 weeks for the appointments in general practice, which I think is really good, because sometimes patients need to come back longer than 2 weeks. You know, GPs or nurses will say, come back and see me in 3 weeks, or their routines will be slightly different. And that always causes some discussion, because those numbers then skew the results and skew what data is being collected. So I think it'd be really good to drop that.
And I'll add my comment. I think then I had an email exchange with you. Is there space for more board level metrics? And I was, when I asked that question, I was thinking about pharmacy first, and also actually NHS app use. I think you responded not at the moment, but I think that's the other thing. If this has to be dynamic, the 10-year plan will be published in some months from now, and that may provide slightly different context. And if we're going to make a left shift, we should also make a left shift in the number of metrics we allocate to primary care commissioning. But I'll patiently wait for the moment. I'll hand to Shepard, and then I'll ask you for some reflections if you have any on what you've heard, Diane. Shepard.
Yeah, I just wanted to react on the 2 weeks. I wonder whether there is an alignment piece that needs to happen before we drop, given everything that is going on, and just understanding what is happening in the region in reaction to that.
Okay, I'll leave that for the team to clarify, and we'll hear the results and probably see if it needs to be retained for slightly longer. Diane, any reflections on what you've heard?
Many thanks, Hein. I would take committee's direction really on the 14-day GP appointment. I appreciate you. We probably did start this ahead of changes happening, and we can check what's in the other dashboards that would provide that kind of dynamic information in the background as well. For unique patients, what we have built into the IPR for each reporting area is a definitions view, so people can see how those the definitions behind each of those metrics. So I couldn't tell you the technical detail behind that right now, but that will be available in that report. With regards to I think there's a bit of a conversation exchange around hypertension, contraception, and naming. And thank you, Sharon, for your expertise in that response as well. And we are pretty full with regards to the number of metrics already planned to go up to the board. We have quite a range of areas to include across workforce, elective, planned care, UEC, mental health. There's quite a lot to go up to the board to refine upwards, and we will have a separate quality report as well. But that being said, this is not a completely fixed position, and as things like the 10-year plan or future planning years come through, there will almost undoubtedly be some changes, but that would just mean building some of those different data flows behind the scenes. So there won't be immediate changes, but there will be, will be a flexible report to that regard. So I think I'm hearing we want to just clarify on the 14-day and whether that is something we want in this report or in the dashboards.
Well, an action point, and maybe I can allocate it to Shepard to clarify and then revert back to you, Diane. And if I can pick up, I think I've heard approval for the content of the IPR, and that was the purpose and the recommendation. So can I just check with committee members there is support for that? Very good. You have the approval. So many thanks again to you and your team. So great progress. Many thanks, Diane.
Thank you.
That takes us to item 10, the Strategic Estates Report. We have Paul with us. Paul, can I hand over to you to introduce?
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, paper just for noting today, so no approvals required. I'm assuming everyone's read the paper. I just want to pull out a few sections for to give you a bit of an update on. Firstly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Way 4B programme. It's been nearly 6 years. I can't believe it's been that long since we first had the announcement of that funding back in 2019. But we're now reaching kind of the end of that programme. I'm pleased to say that since our last quarterly update, the Kings Lynn Health Hub is opened and we're now delivering clinical services from the building there, which is great news. And feedback from the primary care tenant so far is positive. We've had no negative issues about the building, which is great. The second new build, which is Magna Medical Centre, which previously referred to as Rackheath, it is due to complete this summer. The earliest that building will be open will be in September this year. We've got furniture delivery penciled in for the first week of September, so it definitely won't be open before there's seats for people to sit on. We're looking for the anchor tenants to move in first. If the committee remembers, the building is kind of right sized for the future, so there will be quite a bit of vacant space in that building. We're going to have some of that space as bookable space via the NHS Property Services open space system. So initially 4 consultation rooms and a kind of a group space room. And we're aiming for that to go live in January next year to give the anchor tenants a chance to settle into the building first before other kind of ad hoc users start to use the building. If that proves successful, then there is more space, so we could expand that bookable space if the demand is there. So that's all good news on Way 4B. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Primary Care Utilisation and Modernisation Fund. There's been a few updates since the paper was written. It's welcome news, the fund. It's 102 million nationally, but it's also challenging news as well. So our share of the fund is 1.9 million for Norfolk and Waveney. You note in the paper that we had schemes listed up to 1.3 million. And that was the earlier part of this calendar year when we had to submit in expressions of interest to NHS England. It was a challenge for us to get practices to come forward to want to be part of this scheme. They didn't fully understand what they were being asked to sign up to. And at this point, all practices who have submitted expression of interest, they're still free to walk away from this. There's no commitment from them at this point. We do now have a 7th scheme on the list. So we've got 7 schemes, which brings us up to 1.7 million of our 1.9 million. And at that point, we're going to kind of hold at that 7, which will give us 0.2 million contingency in case we've got our estimates wrong on the other schemes. We do have the opportunity to chop and change schemes as we move through the year if need to. We are waiting for guidance from NHS England region around how we action that, but we're not the only ICB who are going to have to make changes. Also like to issue a bit of a public apology really to the 6 practices who were named. It was news to us that they were going to be published by the DH as being put forward. Ourselves and the other ICBs in the east of England did ask for those practices not to be named because at this point there is no commitment, and we're still trying to work through collectively are the schemes viable, both in terms of finances and being delivered in time. But that list is out there now. we are engaged with all of the practices, and we're aiming to get kind of PIDs or project initiation documents drafted the best we can by the end of this month. Region have suggested that we get submissions into them by the end of June. So there will be a flurry of activity to get these through our internal governance processes. So via the delivery group. The big risk, as I see it, for the fund is the legal side of the of the process. I note in the paper around grant agreements. We've fed back to NHS England consistently for quite a long time now that the grant agreements that they require practices to sign up to are not overly pragmatic approach, and there's no kind of sense of scale to the level of investment. And I think well, we're not the only ICB who's fed that back. They have kind of listened to us now, and they are working on a simplified template or agreement for schemes up to £144,000. I'm still nervous about it because we haven't seen what the template looks like, and we haven't been given any timescales as to when we can receive that. But that could potentially make a big difference. If it is a lot simpler, that will make schemes easier to deliver. But there is still nervous about it. Just to give it a bit of context, we have an existing scheme in the patch which was approved by the delivery group in around February 2024. The legals are still ongoing for that scheme between NHS England solicitors and the practice solicitors, and that is for a grant of the region of £30,000. So it's over a year of solicitors talking to each other. It kind of evidences why there needs to be change. The other point just to highlight on the fund is in the paper, I note that funding awarded must be spent by December 25. We've had a slight change in guidance in that schemes need to be delivered by March 26, but NHS England need to draw down the funding from DH by December 25. So slight tweak there, but still challenging timescales. But overall, it is a welcome investment, but we are just tweaking with the edges. You're not going to be able to do anything significant with this fund at a national level in these timescales, and we really need more investment in a state to make a significant change for all of the population growth that we've got coming and the estate that we have, which we know there's condition issues. So although welcome, ideally we need more. And the last point I'd like to highlight is just Drayton. So what we're going to try and do with these papers going forward is just give a bit more of a flavour for one specific scheme to maybe answer up a few queries. I've put Drayton in there this time around because that scheme is due for completion next month. The committee approved the business case for this in 2023, but a first PID for this scheme was kicking around in 2020, so it's taken 5 years to get to delivery. I was on site a few weeks ago, and it looks great. The bill's pretty much finished now, just some commissioning works to do. Power should all be connected this month, and then practical completion to hand over to the practice on the 21st of June. So by practical completion, I mean the build is finished. They've commissioned all of the services, so all the mechanical and electrical services are all working. Will then take a bit of time for the practice to then mobilise that space ready to deliver their clinical services. Appendix 1A and 1B, just a bit of a reminder of the kind of sense of scale of the improvement there. So the scheme has seen the demolition of a previous extension and replaced with a much larger extension. So the old extension had 2 consultation rooms and a treatment room, which was not very well used. And that's been replaced with 6 consultation rooms, some digital rooms, and a physiotherapy room. I just couldn't get my words out there, and then 2 new treatment rooms as well, plus a second floor for admin space. Final thing I'd like to say about the scheme is a good example really of how the different parts of the system come together. So we've benefited here from a Section 106 arrangement via a small parcel of land. In general, we as an ICB would prefer cash contributions from developments rather than land. But in terms of this scheme, land contribution works really well because what was available was next door to the existing practice. It's enabled the car park to be extended to then make space for the additional footprint of the building, which is good news. The landlord is putting a significant capital investment into the scheme. We're doing our part in terms of increased revenue costs, and under the terms of their lease, the practice are making a contribution to well. They've got an FRI lease, a fully repairing and insuring lease, so they are spending as accordance with their lease. So some of the existing premises, they're putting in new windows to kind of help match the rest of the build. So once it's up and running, I think it's a really good example of how all the bits come together, really. That's all I wanted to say, Hein, but happy to take any questions.
Many thanks, Paul. A really informative report. I'll open up for questions and comments. Sadie.
Thank you for the report, Paul, and thanks to you and your team for all the support you provide. Over the last few years, you've made really amazing progress in moving through these schemes that have been, I suppose, floating around for a very long time. I know it takes a long time to bring a scheme from idea to delivery, but that certainly seems to have picked up pace under your leadership. So thank you very much. And I really like having the spotlight section in the paper. It's great to see. We see the early papers, we see the business cases, but to actually see the plans and the photos of things actually happening and actually being there is really good to see. So I'd be really keen to see that in future, and perhaps we can do some catch-ups on the ones we've missed as well. That would be really nice for future papers. Thank you. The other thing I think is just it's an expenditure and a cost pressure that we don't really see too much is the section on rent reviews. I'm grateful for you including those. We've seen costs increasing over the last few years, building costs increasing, and I think it's really important to see that even our current estate is going up in value, and then when you add the cost of new builds, extensions, remodeling to create additional capacity, it places great strain on budgets that are already under strain, and yet obviously we need more. And I think I can't remember how many potential schemes were in the pipeline, but I think it was over 100 that we had altogether. I'd also like to just note and say thanks for the work. I know we don't get the same level of support in our financial allocations for our other primary care contractors, but you're still looking at innovative ways of trying to attract funding. And I know it's very early days at the moment, but we're really keen to keep working with you on that so that we can potentially bring some capital funding into other primary care contractor groups as well.
Thanks, Sadie. Lauren?
Yeah, Sadie kind of beat me to it. Just to say, I was really pleased to see the inclusion of pharmacy alongside optometry and dentistry in the considerations, particularly around Section 106 funding. I know it's a really long-term hard slog to get something from development to fruition, but we've all got to start somewhere, haven't we? So it's really good to see that we're considering a plan for the future on that, particularly as we know that a lot of pharmacies are really sort of struggling with things like consultation room capacity. Gone are the days where just having one room available with one pharmacist will, meet the entire demand for some of these services that are ramping up. So anything we can do to look at, future technology or, utilisation of the spaces that we have and support for that is really welcomed.
Thank you, Lauren. There's no further comments, but I would echo it. It's indeed a great overview, and we should not be shy sharing the good stories and get them out there. So many thanks, Paul, to you and your team, and thanks for bringing this note to committee. That takes me to item 11, the strategic prescribing report. Michael, can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Hein. So I'll take the paper as read and just pick out a few individual things. So to prescribe a medicine is the most, as I've probably told you many times before, the most common intervention in the whole of the NHS, and it's the second biggest cost to the NHS next to staff overall. You'll see the large number of work streams that my team are involved in the various pillars, as we call them. 4 main pillars and a 5th one around workforce and special projects. There's one line in section 6.2 which is just alludes to 6.5 alludes to the £14 million cost efficiencies that we've worked up, and that one section doesn't really represent the huge industry that is involved around cost efficiencies. And we're just currently working how to deliver those. With identifying them is possibly the easy part, but working on implementation plans is slightly more difficult. But that's being worked through and has a good RAG status in terms of deliverability. Just something around quality. Our antimicrobial stewardship, so our prescribing of antibiotics, is going in the good trajectory. We were a bit of a regional outlier at one point on both national indicators, but by working with PCNs and practices in a targeted way, particularly willing outliers, we've made significant improvements in that, which is gratifying. So we're far from being the highest in the region or nationally anymore. I'll just pick out, I was going to focus on implementation of obesity drugs in this paper, but it's still in development to some extent. And I'll just highlight the fact that the obesity drugs have a license, which is approved by the MHRA, which is quite wide in its criteria, so it's licensed for a wide group of patients, but then NICE does the cost effectiveness analysis and recommends it in a smaller group of patients. And then further to that, NHS England have agreed with NICE a phased implementation approach, particularly with tirzepatide, otherwise known as Mounjaro. You may hear about it in the media, which means that it was available in Tier 3 services from April and should be available in primary care from July, but in a quite narrow cohort initially, so patients with a BMI greater than 40 and +4 obesity-related comorbidities, and that initial cohort is a few thousand patients. So we're working with NHS England on the numbers of patients and the phasing, and there are ongoing discussions with the in the ICB with primary care, which I'm told are going quite well, around how this is going to work in practice. But later in the year, we are likely to hear about possibly some other cost-effective obesity drugs. So it's which might be better value for the NHS and might be able to be used in a wider cohort, but that is subject to some ongoing discussions nationally. So it's just a temper that it's not necessarily tirzepatide will be the sole medicine going forward. So perhaps later in the year we'll hear some news about other options, which might mean that we'll be able to treat a wider cohort sooner than the NHS England phased implementation plan, which, as I say, is going quite well at the moment. But we hope to have that all in place by July. Any questions, comments, welcomed, or ideas for any future medicines related papers.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you in a moment on tirzepatide, but
okay,
you already explained quite a bit of it. Sharon and Karen and Sadie.
Michael, just interested in terms of the antimicrobial stewardship and the downward trend of the antibiotic prescribing. And I think that's quite interesting in line with the Pharmacy First that came in, because there was a concern when Pharmacy First was implemented that obviously there would be an increase and a spike in the prescribing of antibiotics. So my assumption is the data, because the records of the antibiotic prescribing from a pharmacy goes into the GP, does that include the Pharmacy First transactions, or do we need to do a further piece of work on that?
I would need to do a further piece of work just to clarify that that is absolutely the case, because my understanding was the prescribing was separated on ePact. So I believe this is attributed to practices. I would have to confirm that the NHS BSA are definitely adding it to practices. I'm not aware that they are at the minute, but yeah. So I'll come back to you on that one. Is I think
perfect. Thank you.
The answer, yeah, sure, because that would be very that would be good news, wouldn't it? If
Yes.
overall it reduced antibiotic usage, and that would be yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Hein. Thanks, Michael. Really to congratulate you on the work you've done around AMS prescribing. It's fabulous to see, the progress that you've made. And I think we're beginning to see an impact in the reduction in Clostridium difficile that we've had in the hospitals recently. So I think overall the pincer movement and perhaps the prescribing is having, long-term benefits, that patients are not developing necessarily C. diff. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, great.
Thanks, Karen. Sadie?
Thank you, Michael. It's great report, and so much going on in the team. I was also going to congratulate the team and the practices on the work that has been done on antimicrobial prescribing. I had the same question as Sharon about whether Pharmacy First figures were included in there, but I was also going to note that the medical delegated commissioning team are beginning the practice visit programme. And Shepherd will correct me, I'm sure, because I've probably got it wrong, but I think around 9 practices a quarter are going to be visited. And once we know which ones they are, your team would obviously be very welcome to join those practice visits to talk about anything that you feel is individual to that particular practice. It'd be really good to have a joined up approach.
That would be great. Yeah, certainly, Sadie. We could, if you give us a list in good time, we can work on maybe the 2 or 3 things around medicines that would be worth having a look at. I mean, definitely antimicrobial stewardship and possibly dependence forming medicines, but maybe something else exclusive to that practice. That would be really good. Thank you.
Good. Also wanted to say, Michael, and we'll see it in the strategic finance report, but great job on the efficiency schemes this year. Some really significant efficiency savings achieved. So well done there. I just wanted to confirm on tirzepatide, and thank you for your further comments. So it's NHS England which will say after consultations, this is the sort of phased approach we will do, and then each ICB will consistently apply that, or is there degrees of freedom how this is operated?
That's a very good question. There isn't supposed to be any degrees of freedom. There is a national implementation team at NHS England who we meet with regularly, and we believe the cohorts are the cohorts, and we should be sticking to that. It's not necessarily us in the ICB who would be deviating from that. I mean, there may be some individual practices who possibly deviate, and we'll keep an eye on that. But it's intended that it's phased over that time, because it is quite an expensive drug, and it would be best to use it in the higher risk patients first. That's just makes perfect sense.
Thank you, Joni.
Just to add some detail on that, so some of the phasing detail is already out. One thing I would say is it's very unlikely we'd be able to go any faster than the phasing indicated, because there is very limited capacity to do any of this. So part of the phasing is to allow for that ramp up of capacity. Wraparound services, etc., aren't in place yet. So there shouldn't really be any expectation of anything going any faster than a phasing. In fact, even managing that phasing is going to be a huge struggle because of the lack of capacity and resources and the lack of wraparound care. And we're only a month away from the time period when those would start to be rolled out. So yeah, just very caution on the expectations of this prescribing. It is going to be very, very difficult to implement.
That's a good point, Joni. So yeah, it's not just around the finance; it is definitely around capacity as well. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. If there's no further comments, very useful update, Michael. Many thanks for that. We continue on item 12, the delivery group reports for noting. I think, Shep, we go to you first for GP and community pharmacy.
Well, thank you, Hein. Just checking in with Sharon if you need to add anything, but the paper is for noting, and there are no matters for escalations from that meeting. Quite a number of items that we discussed are quite aligned to the agenda today, so really I won't be providing an update on that. We have already discussed the resilience risk already for general practice and also for the community pharmacy in the respective sections. So I think that is my update on this one. I don't think there's anything that I probably need to say more than what I've just said on this.
Thanks, Shepard. Any comments on the report? Anyone? No. Many thanks, Shepard, and Sharon clearly has contributed to the report as well. And then the dental services report, Fiona, I think you will introduce that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, just to say the paper is for noting and to report that the meeting was quorate. I suppose the decisions that were made really reflect, and the item for escalation to the committee really reflect on the concerns around the resilience and stability of NHS dental services, which obviously we've already discussed. But we will obviously be continuing to monitor that.
Thank you, Fiona. Any questions or comments from anyone? No. Clear report and point of escalation noted as we covered earlier in the meeting as well. So many thanks, Fiona. That takes us to item 13, the strategic finance report. Sarah, can you introduce it?
Yep, will do. So I again assume this has been read. Just want to sort of talk through, because this was the final report for 24-25, which currently shows primary care being £7 million overspent. This is against a budget of £588 million, so we spent £592 million. You'll see in the report there's the waterfall diagram which highlights where the variances are, but in terms of adverse variances, we've got 4.4 million on the prescribing, and that's detailed in the one of the, I think, slide 6 in the pack. We've got just 4.5 million sitting within primary care. Largest chunk of that relates to LCS and specifically complex dressings. We've ongoing sort of activity issues, and some of these are going back now to 23-24, which we're currently working through. We've had additional rent reimbursements, again going back previous years, so again sort of non-recurrent costs, and then an increase in our ARS costs. In terms of favourable budgets, we've got about 2.5 million, and that really relates to pharmacy budget. We were allocated a significant sum of money the uplift for the CPCF contract, but what we actually received and what we actually required spent was significantly lower, hence the large underspend at the end of the year. We have other variances around oxygen, GPIT and dental. And then I think looking at the rest of the pack, as alluded to earlier, we've got the prescribing efficiency schemes, as well as sort of reports on the LCS, and just sort of reference to Q4 claims, which have now all been processed, all the ones that we've received. So any questions?
Let me see any questions. So can you say a bit more
Nick.
on the, and I'll come to you in a moment, Nick, in a sort of waterfall chart, so section 1, the 2.5 million Optom and pharmacy, you gave a brief explanation, but is it that we've been allocated more than we budgeted at the start of the year, or what's?
Yeah, so I think it related to an award that we received in February, called the CPCF contract. I don't know if Sharon's got any more information what the CPCF contract is, and it was actually allocated to us based on a fair share basis, which actually meant that we had a lower requirement for this allocation, so it feels like it almost feels a bit of a windfall. So that's the reason behind that.
I'll come to you, Nick, in a moment, but Sharon, anything you can add?
Yeah, CPCF stands for the Community Pharmacy Contractual Framework. So I should imagine because the 24-25 pharmacy contract was only negotiated at the end of March, potentially this was the advancement for that uplift that was received for the 24-25 contract. I can't remember off the top of my head how much of a percentage it was, but it was a definitive increase from what was kind of expected. So I should imagine that uplift is in relation to that.
Okay. Nick.
Yeah, the thing about dental budget is that very often it's only after the financial year end that we establish the clawback levels. But this is an in-year underspend of 1.86 million, and I think people might ask why that wasn't fully spent during the year, when dentistry is clearly in the situation that is facing at the moment. And was there money that was handed back at the last minute for any contracts that have actually gone into this financial year?
Okay, just so regarding your first point about UDAs and activity that comes in after April or after the end of March, we certainly take account of that. We included a significant sum, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but for UDAs that and we compared it to what we had last year for UDAs delivered in April and May. So those numbers will be taken into account for these numbers. So then in terms of, we did have money taken away from us at the end of the financial year. NHSE did claw back. I think it's a value of about, I think it's about 5 million in it. I'd have to clarify that. And I think, and again, Fiona wants to come in terms of a lot of the projects slip. We had slippage for this year. I feel certainly for 25-26, a lot further ahead in terms of making sure that projects will start, and so to reduce that slippage element.
Look, can I suggest, because I think Nick's point is well made, and I think people just stand back and say, well, couldn't we have done something with the green bar, so to speak, in the chart? So maybe we can take it as an action away and just hear back at the next meeting for sort of a well-rounded answer to it. And I appreciate, Sarah, you've covered already some topics, but it would be good to have that available for the next meeting. Lauren.
Yeah, can I just ask if particularly, obviously I'm interested in the pharmacy budget side of this, but is that budget ring fenced? And if a payment comes in that late in the year and goes on to last year's budget, will that be carried forward?
I don't believe it is, but I would have to clarify that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just bearing in mind, you know, we've been talking about certain services potentially being decommissioned or not being able to afford to open on bank holidays and things. Yeah, there's a huge sort of chunk has come in at the end, so it'd be good to explore, you know, exactly why that's there and what that was sort of meant to be spent on or what it was meant to cover in year.
Yeah, okay, I can take that away.
Yeah, maybe include in the same action point I just highlighted. It's just good to make sure we have a well-rounded explanation for those. Nick, is that a legacy hand or Nick's screen is frozen from my vantage point? It's gone. If there's no further comments, so maybe a couple of action points, but we can wrap it into one just to clarify some points. And as the other comments, as I noted before, a good overview on the prescribing efficiency schemes. I think we were all conscious there was a stretch placed on the team, but I think there's several that deliver over 2 million efficiencies each, so that's well done. Good, many thanks, Sarah. We'll move to item 14, Pharmaceutical Service Regulation Committee. Greg, will you introduce this?
Thanks, Hein. I think we've got two in one here because we've also got the quarterly report for the GOS contracting as well. So I will take both papers as read, and they are for noting purposes only. So just as a reminder, following the delegation of GOS services and pharmaceutical contracting from the 1st of April 2023, the pharmacy and optometry team is hosted at Herts and West Essex and operates on behalf of all 6 ICBs. And then the PSRC, which is the Pharmacy Services Regulatory Committee, operates out of Herts and West Essex on behalf of all 6 ICBs via the MOU. So contained within the optometry paper is just an overview of any optometry changes and contractual changes over the last quarter. And contained within the Pharmacy Services Regulatory Committee, again, it's a quarterly report that's generated for PCCC, detailing market entry decisions, market entry applications, fitness decisions, and regulatory timescales within the committee. There is nothing specific to note from this one, so I will just take the paper as read unless anybody has any additional questions or points.
Thanks, Greg. I was looking for that confirmation. Nothing particularly standing out from this report. Any comments or questions for Greg on these reports? No. Many thanks, Greg, for the update. Then item 15, I think first have Shepard to provide some voiceovers on the general practice 1-year contract, and then subsequently Sharon on the community pharmacy contract or framework. So Shepard, can I hand over to you first?
Thank you, Hein. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so you've got a set of slides which really provides a summary of a big document on GP contract for this year. So I don't intend to go through the 30 slides, but you have them for reference when you need to do that. I'll probably pick a few slides to just highlight or just to draw attention to. So I think the first slide is really about what the government's position and its commitment on what we need to do. So there's clear commitment to reduce bureaucracy there, and which is reflected in the changes in the target, and also increasing the flexibility around the hours, and also the encouragement on systems to take measures around the red tape challenge. And also more important around the attention that we need to put in around the prevention for the biggest killers. So thinking about the cardiovascular diseases and so on and so on. There's also an incentive around continuity of care, and perhaps linking that to some of the funding incentives around risk stratification to identify cohorts of patients. Then another commitment around elective treatment around the NHS standard of 92%. So just to kind of highlight the government's position on that, and then move on to the next slides in terms of how the funding is being provided to support those agendas. Slide number 3 kind of gives you the overall financials around that. I know I've got finance colleagues here, so if I do get those numbers not right, I'm sure you'll be able to correct me. So I think it's a 1-year contract agreement, which is really great that we've got an agreement, and that really has gone a long way in kind of providing assurance in the system and also some contribution towards some stability and resiliency in the system. There's an overall increase in investment across the core practice contract and the network days, and that is 7.2 cash growth. And colleagues have advised that there is an estimated 4.8% real growth on that, which is really positive. I guess the other point I could just pick on this, I think there's a note to say a further uplift may be made following the government's response to the DDRB outcomes for 2025. I don't intend to say more on that slide. I will move on to the elements around the core contract and just highlight the positive improvements around the global sum payment per weighted patient. I think roughly about £9 there. Then I think something to observe is also a positive improvement around the COF, which is the quality and outcomes framework. I think roughly again about £5 on the point on that one. Really, I think this speaks to the health and well-being of our workforce around the local reimbursements rates, which have been uplifted, addressing in the areas around parental leave, sick leave, prolonged start leave, and suspensions. Really good to see also some positive improvements around immunization, childhood immunization, which are part of the essential services. Moving on, let me just through this slide. Probably want to talk about the network days. I think it is reinforcement and alignment to the direction of travel around improving resilience in general, and PCNs are working together to pool resources or shared resources, and also the focus on improve health outcomes through use of population health management and reducing inequality. So the use of data, so there's a good alignment on that. But I think the key thing around here is around the flexibility that is being introduced around the as roles. Right. Right. On slide 18, it's just to reinforce some of the conversations around the advice and guidance. I think that has been discussed, so I don't intend to put more, but a lot of good work has started already. Practices have been offered as of yesterday, and the sign-up process is taking place for the next 2 weeks. So really positive in terms of that shift that we are looking for. Some reference to the neighborhood health guidelines, which is still anticipating some of the key information to come through, but the conversations are quite live in the system. At the end, we've set out some of the areas that we are focusing, which aligns to the contract, which is obviously around improving access, reducing the time people wait for elective, and also improvement around the A&E waiting times, addressing health inequalities and the shift from analog to digital. So we have considered all the aspects that have been provided, and we've set out as our areas of focus, which brings us into that alignment. I'll probably want to stop there and probably ask any questions if they're there, or any contribution in terms of some of the areas that probably we need to focus on.
Thanks, Shepherd. Ian.
Thanks, Hein. Thanks, Shepherd, and certainly agree. Those slides are a really, really useful summary of where things sit. So thanks to all that provided those. Just picking up on one comment you made around DDRB and the further uplift. We're, as an LMC and other LMCs, are not expecting any further uplift to budgets, because the government has made it pretty clear across all professional review bodies that where DDRB or other professional pay reviews are undertaken, the recommendations, where applied, will come from existing budgets, and that's education, that's certainly healthcare. So we're not expecting any further uplift. But what that will mean is that there are pressures on the existing budget. So that's one just to kind of be aware of. 4.8% real growth you mentioned. Yes, that is certainly welcome after years of imposed contracts on well below inflation, well below cost pressure settlements. But that does not make up the shortfall that has happened over the last 3 years in particular, with increased pay awards not being covered by the uplift in contract prices. So it's really just to kind of paint the wider picture that whilst 4.8% real growth is helpful, it's certainly not the panacea to all the pressures that have been present over the last number of years.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Any other comments or questions? No, I found it a very helpful overview, and thanks for your additional comments, Shep, and also your contribution, Ian. That takes me to the community pharmacy contractual framework. Sharon.
Thank you, Hein. I'll obviously take the paper as read, and the paper is here for noting purposes. The community pharmacy contract was formally communicated on the 31st of March 2025, and this included the 25-26 funding envelope, but also confirmed the retrospective funding for the pharmacy sector for 24-25. As you can imagine, the late announcement of the funding for the previous year did really hamper both the ICB's ability, but also contractors' ability to future plan and long-term plan for the future, as their funding was unknown. For the purpose of this overview, I'm going to concentrate mainly on the 25-26 and focus on the future. Key highlights around the new contract. It was a 19.7% increase, which, as we've discussed before, was one of the largest increases for any of the primary care contractors. However, it's really important that we put that into context with the economic analysis, which I'll discuss later. Obviously, pharmacy has had flat funding for the last 5 years. So in effect, this increase was a way of, I suppose, bringing them back up to the baseline of everyone else. And there still is a funding deficit, as we'll discuss in a bit. The main key highlights as well is increasing the service remuneration for some of the services, and also continued funding and focus on pharmacy first. And then also as well, some of the services are to be expanded. For example, the new contraception service will have the emergency contraception element added to it from possibly October this year. And also they're looking at utilising the clinical skills of the wider pharmacy team, such as our technicians within some of those services. With a focus on the services, it's really important that as an ICB we continue to support the increase in activity of these services, which obviously links back to the work that we continue to do and continue to engage with on Pharmacy First, particularly looking at the referrals into the service, but also patient education around the availability of the service and the fact that they can self-refer for some elements of this service. As I say, should be read in line with the economic analysis, and this was commissioned by NHS England as part of a commitment with the funding negotiations. This got released the Friday before the contract was announced. It's quite a large document, but it determines the cost of delivering pharmaceutical services is set at 5 billion. The total funded package delivered for pharmacies in the contract was 3 billion. So as we can see that there's still a 2 billion deficit or shortfall in the pharmacies in providing pharmaceutical services. Interestingly enough, 47% of pharmacies reported not being profitable in the last accounting year. And obviously we have had some challenges with permanent closures within the ICB. So the funding or the findings of the report basically confirm that the financial challenges facing pharmacy contracts remain, and there is a need for revised funding models to ensure long-term sustainability. The new contract, after discussion with the LPC and the providers, is seen as a positive step, but as we say, it's not a funding agreement that will fully fix all of the issues, and in terms of some of the places, it will not remove the risk of financial viability concerns. There is a commitment from the government of producing or providing long-term sustainability in the sector, and this will be on the forefront of any discussions with any future negotiations. Also, as an ICB, we look to develop our long-term pharmacy strategy this year, and we look to ensure we enable our pharmacies to be fit for the future. I'm happy to take any comments.
Many thanks, Sharon. And I've not read the economic analysis yet, but I have called it up. So it's a big read indeed. And what I hadn't appreciated at first, that it was commissioned by NHS England and DHSC. So I think there was helpful context as well. Good. Let me see if there's questions or comments from anyone. Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'll have a comment on this, and I've discussed directly with Sharon, so I won't bore everyone, but I think the real key highlight there is that economic report. It was an independent report, but like you say, it was commissioned by NHS England, and it actually also looks at what may be needed in the future and quotes that 8 billion may be needed very shortly in planning terms. So actually the shortfall between what we've currently got, what is currently needed, and what may be needed in the future is actually even more significant. But as Sharon said, widely it's seen as a positive step forward, but just the start of the conversation. So we're really hoping to start national negotiations in summer this year so that we actually have more clarity on what's coming next year and can plan better ahead. But like I said, it is looking still more towards service-driven contracts. So even though it's an uplift in payment, it's also asking for, as always, more work to be delivered in order to secure that payment. So it's a positive step forward, but not there yet.
Thanks, Lauren. Any other comments? No, many thanks, and I'll find time to go through the economic analysis. I'm actually quite interested to read it. Thank you. That takes us to item 16, the annual e-declaration report. And Shepard, you will introduce that.
Yes, thank you. So this is a key contractual document or report that is provided by practices on an annual basis. And probably I should just give a little bit of background, a little bit on this before I go into the actual results. So there are multiple questions that practices have to answer in relation to about 9 areas that are set out in the document. And that includes the practice details, things like name, address, and contact information. Then also information around the practice staff. So looking at the staffing levels and the roles and responsibilities there. Then there's also, there are questions around the premises and the equipment that get used there. Practice services, that is the services that are being offered by the practice. And then the procedures, which is around the policies and protocols and everything. Then also around the governance of how they run the services. Then obviously the regulation, which is around the CQC registration, professional registration and stuff. Then the final item is around the GP practice information technology aspect. So it's quite a piece of work for practice to go through all those multiple questions. I've tried to work out how many questions they have to address. Some of the questions are optional but it's really helpful if practices are able to provide that. So going into the results of that, before I do that, is just to say the paper will require some approval in terms of the approach that we are taking to address some of the areas that needs improvement. So of the 105 practices we have, 99 practices were able to complete the annual requirement. And 6 practices were not able to do so, and conversations have taken place, and I've kind of summarized the reasons in terms of system access. I think there were 2 practices that struggled to access the system, but I believe some of those have been resolved, and a lead submission has been done with some of those practices. Then the other issues were more of the everyday challenges around the staffing and stuff. So, but we're working with those practices. So it's a really, really positive that majority of our practices were able to do that. What is really positive is that 100% of our practices confirmed compliance with the regulation and the professional registration, which is really positive and reassuring, I think, to ourselves as commissioners and obviously for our population, that the doctors that are working in our systems, they are going through the professional registration process and the revalidations and everything that is required to do the job, and also the CQC, which is a regulatory registration, which is really positive. And also the confirmation that the premises, I know we've got Paul here leading on the states of our practices, but all practices reported that the premises that are being used are fit for purpose, albeit some improvements are needed to meet some of the ambitions that we are setting around improving access and improving patient experience, which is really great. It was quite visible that the support that we have in the system around the infection prevention control was quite strong. So really positive to see that being reported, self-reported by practices. And obviously, it was good to see that there's compliance around the learning disability, around the DNA CPR protocols, given what happened during COVID around this population group, and really good that attention is still being put on that. And again, the workforce risk assessment stuff, really good to see. I was also really interested around the language and interpretation services. It was really good that there was a strong response on that in terms of our interest around health inequalities stuff. Okay, so just shining a light on some of the areas that I thought were strong in that, but I think there are still some areas that we need to look at going forward in terms of understanding what actually that means. So practice closures was one of the areas that was consistent across, I think, nationally and also in our system, that there are closures that are taking place. And we need to look at those, and they're happening during core hours. What that means, I don't think at this point we are able to say what it is. But we suspect it's a combination of arrangements, some of them historic, some of them to do with perhaps lunchtime. So I really don't want to try and speculate what it is, but it just means that we've got some work to do to understand what that is. Then there was also an area around strengthening the local processes for NHS 1-1 emergency diversion arrangements. So we'll be looking at that to see what exactly that means. Then I had a particular interest as well around the PPGs. I think there were some practices where we probably just need to look at how they are engaging with their local population in terms of the representation, and also whether those are taking place. Really important to have the spaces for the local population to share their experience on how things are going, and also to shape how the services are being delivered going forward. Then also a small number of practices were not able to answer whether they had the space for staff to speak to an independent person. So that piece of work will follow. And again, I think it's good to see that continuity of care is also part of this, which really connects to the GP contracts. A lot of stuff around dispensing, but on the main, the compliance was really strong, but there are some areas that we probably just need to pick up and see how we can support. So I think with this, we have set out a plan which seeks to understand our system in terms of compliance. We've got the position from practices, and we need to further our conversation to understand this a bit more. So at the end of the paper, you've got our proposed approach on how we want to engage and understand and support practices going forward with this. I think I've gone as far as I think I should, unless if there are any questions or comments or any challenge and support.
Thank you, Shepard, and as you indicated, it's an important piece of assurance we get as a committee. So I have a question in a moment. Let me check if others have a question or comment on this report. So the question I had from memory, we have roughly 95% of practices each year, around about that percentage, that are fully compliant, which is excellent news, but there's typically a handful who can't meet that. And without mentioning names, but do we see different names each year, or is it the same names that come back? And is there a link? Are these practices also the ones that struggle on the resilience more than others? And again, I don't need to know names, but more sort of thematically, Shepard.
I would say no. The names that we have this year are not the same as last year on the main. I think I would say approximately 80% of the 6 practices, they are going through some internal kind of challenges, changes in staffing, and really prioritization of work at a time. Then the other 2 were in touch with the digital team, and they were trying to get some help to get that done. So I wouldn't put those 2 as part of those we have. Yeah, I don't think I've seen the same names, but I would probably want to check that again and again just to make sure that I'm right. Unless if my other colleagues who are here, I know their colleagues who were leading on this piece of work, but definitely not the same, because I know then. Yeah, okay. Jordan wants to help me.
Jordan, now contributed to the
Thank
document.
you, Shepard.
Yeah, so the ones which have been raised aren't the same from the previous years. There has been a lot of differences in the questions that have been asked from the previous years as well. And as Shepherd is right that the practices which have been identified have gone through quite significant changes, which we are hoping to address in the action plan. So yeah, I can confirm that none of the practices are frequent flyers.
Which is actually quite encouraging to hear. So thank you for that. So as you state in the note, approval is sought to implement the proposed action plan. I think committee can be supportive of that. I see various nods, so that is approved. And as I said, it's an important piece of assurance for this committee to get. So thank you for bringing it to our attention. That takes to item 17, local dispute resolution for primary care contracts. Fiona, can you introduce that?
Thank you. So I'll take the paper as read. This paper is for approval by committee, but in summary, the ICB needs to put in place a local dispute resolution policy. The one we've been relying on has been rather out of date. So this policy will cover primary medical, dental and optometry services only, and it is in relation to contractual disputes. So those disputes that arise from the contract between the two parties. As you will see from paper, pharmacy disputes are led by the actually I'll put the name in there, the Pharmaceutical Services Regulatory Committee, under the Pharmacy Regulations and Pharmacy Manual, so they're out of scope of this policy. But in essence, the approach is very much to engage with the contractor through discussion, negotiation, and where appropriate to offer mediation to resolve a dispute. And only in the worst case scenario would we move to a dispute panel. Once the dispute panel has heard the dispute, it is then possible for either party to escalate to NHS resolution to consider the dispute. So that in essence, that's the process that would be followed going forward if this is approved.
Thank you, Fiona. Fiona and I had an email exchange on the exact makeup of the panel, and maybe that is something you can confirm offline, Fiona, what the final makeup is. But I think it's important to have a process like this ratified. So if there's no questions or comments, is committee happy to approve the proposed policy? I see not so many thanks for that, Fiona. Take us to any other business. We received one question in writing last night around LCS tracking, a few detailed questions, so we'll get these answers in writing to the person who asked the question, also post them on the website. Any other business from anyone on the call right now? No, then thank you for joining part 1. For those joining part 2, I suggest we reconvene at 3:30. There's a separate link for that, so I may see many of you again. And everyone else, enjoy the rest of your day. See you at the next meeting. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.